Hey yo, welcome to the Godcast.
I hope y'all are buckled up because things are about to get weird.
I don't understand why you chose me.
You want to change the world, son. So do I.
Where are we at in terms of history on the timeline? Where are we exactly? I'm just trying to uncover the truth and bring forth what I can see as the truth. The Bible seemed to be predicting more things than any other conspiracy theory type information. Look, one thing's for certain, that there is so much power in the name of Jesus Christ. That I know for sure.
Welcome to Godcast.
Welcome to Godcast.
The Goodness Over Darkness.
The Goodness Over Darkness podcast.
Here is your host.
Here's your host, Emmanuel Kingman.
Emmanuel Kingman.
Welcome to the light.
Welcome to the light.
Welcome to the light.
It's showtime. What is going on, everybody? I am your host, Emmanuel Kingman, and welcome back to Godcast, the Goodness Over Darkness podcast. I am solo yet again. Mimi, the busy bee, is not here for the intro or the interview. She has been so busy working. But now that Christmas is come and gone, she should have more opportunity to be on the podcast more. Plus, we're going to be doing stuff together more by ourselves, but that is for another time. On today's episode, I had on special guest Adam Stokes, and Adam is a teacher at a high school, Penns Grove High School, from where I am from, which is, well, that is just outside of Philadelphia, but he also teaches at the University of St. Joe's. And man, do I gotta tell you, this conversation was just full of my crazy rantings getting filled in with great depths of knowledge by this man. We covered Mormonism and different facets within that throughout the conversation. We begin the conversation that way, we end the conversation that way, with different things on Mormonism. So I want my audience to really check out what this man has to say, and then maybe give the Book of Mormon a read yourself. It was eye-opening, this conversation. It really was, because I had heard of the alternative history that Mormons have, American history that Mormons have, and that interests me a lot. And the way that Adam puts it all is that it's kind of just the next step from what happened with Jesus Christ on the cross to the next prophetic biblical type of thing would be Mormonism. And I'm not saying to everyone out there to become a Mormon, but I'm saying that the Book of Mormon is like the next thing. It's like updated, almost, if you will, for lack of a better word. It's an updated thing to the Bible, to Christianity. So I really want you guys to listen to this episode and hear out what Adam has to say about it, because it makes a lot of sense. And on top of that, we talk a lot about giants in North America. We talk about a little bit about the mounds and in Ohio and how they connect to Egypt. We get into the Grand Canyon having so much different stuff in there. We talk, is Missouri, could that be Eden? And it makes sense that the new Madrid earthquake in Missouri that reversed the Mississippi River, which I think is part of the second destruction of the world according to the Bible, would that would make sense that it would be right there. The new Madrid earthquake would happen right where Eden was. And would the Grand Canyon be Egypt? I don't know. Would you see in my background here, the hands, they're like, I don't know, like that's all to Christ. It's not me. My hands are up to Christ. I don't know, but uh, California be Israel. You have the Red Sea. Interesting stuff. I don't know what things that interesting ideas that come to me are just supported by some knowledge somewhere, and I don't even know that it does. The Amish, are they the Old Testament Jews, maybe, or connected with them? Well, they certainly are connected to them, and when you start to look into them, but would they be the ones over here? I don't know. We talk about the tribes of Israel going all over the place, being all different races. We talk about Egypt. Like I said, we don't get into Egypt too much because as soon as we started talking about Egypt, then that got us into the giants with the elongated heads. Where do they come from? Atlantis, maybe? Their pre-Adamite race, maybe? Is Cain possibly Prometheus? I say maybe Prometheus or Lucifer was my question. And turns out he might be Prometheus. They have a lot of similarities. And we know from the Bible, we didn't talk about this in the conversation, but the Bible tells us that that Lucifer, or that I'm sorry, that the devil is the murderer from the beginning. And who was the first murderer according to the Bible? Cain. So is Cain the devil? That is he Satan? That I don't know if he's Satan. I think Satan was the adversary that existed already. But it's just interesting stuff. You can put two and two together and get that Cain is Prometheus, and that there are accounts of people, groups of people that were worshiping Cain and the serpent, that they were BFF. It's interesting stuff, man. When you start to look at different things that have gone on throughout human history, it just brings up interesting stuff. When you start to incorporate the Bible as the central focus, and not, if you're using the Bible, I like to use the term which I used in this conversation. Maybe it wasn't even the recording, but I like to use the term, the tributaries make the river more beautiful. Because if we use the Bible as the river of information, and we have tributaries that branch off of the Bible, but aren't actually in the Bible, but that coincide with biblical information, like maybe the Book of Mormon could be one of these tributaries. Maybe these because to me, the Bible is history, that it wasn't religion, that it was just history that was being passed on. We also talk about that in this episode, that the Bible is history and it is the river of information. And then there's tributaries of what happened throughout our history, that there were sections of people who were worshiping Cain as this thing. Well, Cain comes from the Bible. So obviously the Bible's the river, and the tributary is these people called the Canaanites who are worshiping Cain and the serpent simultaneously. And we know that the attributes that Prometheus has, Cain also has. That bringing civilization to people in his line, and making a city, and bringing knowledge, the knowledge of Adam, the knowledge of God, because Adam got the knowledge directly from God. So he's bringing that knowledge to these beings that may have been created from the remainders of Atlantis, which were the fallen, in my opinion, that they then created some kind of mixture of themselves, and they had elongated skulls, mixed themselves with some kind of primate hominid that was here, And then Cain brought knowledge to them and started mixing with them, and they would look at Cain as God. And then maybe the sons of God could also be referencing Cain's children, then impregnating the daughters of man, which would be these hominid women, somewhat hominid women. Or maybe that could have been the Atlanteans that were the sons of God coming into the sons of man. But to me, the sons of man, or I'm sorry, the daughters of man would be different because man created a creation. So they're the daughters of man, and God created a creation, which they would then be the sons of God. Adam's sons, I don't think we're doing that. Obviously, Abel was killed. Cain was one of Adam's sons, and Seth was also one of Adam's sons. I did ask how Cain would have a family, but I didn't ask about Seth. Maybe Seth did too, but I'll have to talk to somebody about that another time. That Seth, who did Seth have children with? Was it one of his sisters, or was it another race outside of the human race, like Cain? That would be interesting, because then, yeah, the sons of God. If Adam was God, then according to this scale, I'm not saying Adam is God. I believe in a spiritual father, but there is also would have to be a physical representation for us as that. So in one sense, on one dimensional scale, then Adam could be, I'm not saying is, but people could perceive it that way at one time in history, and say Adam was God, so his sons Cain and Seth came into the daughters of man, because these men, but they created a creation. So the daughters of man, these hominid beings, were then mixed with these giant humans, because the Israelites were giant. I mean, the biblical characters, they lived much longer. They were probably much larger than we were. We can see all throughout our natural lands that we have a lot of things that look like what we have today and what we are, but much larger, that are rock formation now. And I think they were probably flash frozen that way, that it was burned up so hot and then cooled down so quickly that some things melted, and then all of a sudden, when it froze, it became rock. It fossilized immediately. That's my opinion, of course, but that's why I think that they could have been giants that took unto themselves wives of the daughters of man that were created, and then somehow we are what we are, and that there were many different things here at one time, and they were mixed all throughout, like the medieval history may say, that we had like ogres, one-eyed ogres. We had uh very small people like leprechauns and gnomes. And we also had what the Egyptians depict, these dog-headed beings, like Anubis, Saint Christopher. Also, we have like Thoth, which is I can't remember the word right now, a different type of bird, but man, it begins with an A, and it's gonna annoy me. But anyway, we had those types of beings. You have just all throughout everything, all over the world. When you look at statues of beings that were here, they were probably the Nephilim, these hybrids. They were probably the Nephilim. Just very interesting stuff. I know I got way off track of this episode and all, but just amazing stuff here. but like how I just flowed, that's my tributary from the river that is the Bible, that is our history. It's all there. I think the Bible just starts at Adam and Eve from what we have of it today. And actually, interesting that I just got in the mail yesterday is the Apocrypha. So it's all, and it's by Joseph Lumpkin. He's the author that put together the book of Enoch, the 3 books of Enoch that I have, that I did my series upon. Well, actually, it was only on one Enoch, my book of Enoch series, but it was Joseph Lumpkin was the author of that one. So I got this because I've been checking out Ryan Zem stuff again. You know, he's still doing stuff even though he's on his mission to the North Pole. And he put out something about 4 Esdras or 2 Esdras. You know, it could be 4 Esdras, 2 Esdras, depends on where you get it from. Which means the apocalypse of Ezra, or that's what it is, the apocalypse of Ezra. I'm going to have a grandson in a few months, and his name is going to be Ezra. Very interesting stuff. He'll be born in 322. Well, that's his due date is March of 2022, and 322 is a number of these secret societies. So it's all very interesting stuff. The apocalypse of Ezra. So I got this, and you know, here we are talking about tributaries from the river that is the Bible. So I'm going to be digging into that maybe when I go to the mountains. So this episode will come out. I'll be in the mountains. This episode comes out, and I will be reading the Holy Bible as well as the Apocrypha. This will be the day after Christmas. This episode will come out. So Merry Christmas to everybody. And yes, I do celebrate Christmas still. And that'll be covered in another episode. But I want to wish everybody a happy holiday season. And I wish you all the best health and love and peace imaginable on earth. And like I was saying, I will be in the mountains myself. This will be a very spiritual thing, as well as just a very relaxing physical experience for Mimi and myself. And we'll have a whole episode that comes out on Christmas Day, a bonus episode, which I also have something coming out on Christmas Eve, which was my birthday episode. That will be out. So if you're listening to this, you may want to check out that. Didn't exactly go as I planned, but it went as God planned, and it stands as is. It is a beautiful, beautiful path that we go on, and we make these plans, and they don't happen the way that we want them to. But then when we reflect, they happened the way that they needed to. And with that, I will say stay tuned at the end of the episode for a preview of the next episode. And this will be the final time that I do say that on one of my podcasts, because from now on, I will not be having any in store, and instead my episodes will be coming out as they come in. So with that, enjoy the final trailer for an upcoming episode, which will be Josh and Jason Monday, where we cover gap theory. All right, so without further ado, here is Adam Stokes. Hello, everybody. On today's episode, I have on a guest who is teaching at St. Joe's University in Philadelphia, as well as Penns Grove High School. He has a vast wealth of knowledge into the Bible, giants, and ancient civilizations. He has written a book called From Egypt to Ohio, A Semitic Origin for the Giants of North America. Everybody welcome Adam Stokes to the show. Welcome to
Great
the
to be
show,
here.
Adam.
Thanks for having me.
Oh, thank you so much for coming on the show. I heard you on Rising from the Ashes podcast, and I was just blown away. I mean, all the stuff you guys talked about is all the things that I love. So why don't you introduce yourself a bit to my audience?
Certainly. My interest is in anything ancient, especially North American civilization pre-Columbus, but I'm kind of a fan of anything about the ancient world, Roman civilization, Greek civilization. It's just my contention based on the research I've done that the ancients were much more advanced and much more intelligent than we give them credit for. And I really think that kind of history has distorted, academia and just mainstream scholarship has really kind of distorted the way that we view the ancient world. Yeah, basically, uh, very interested in the ancient advanced technology of particular civilizations, especially in North America, which I don't think gets enough credit at all.
Yes, I totally agree with that. And how did you get into giants and writing this Bible? Was this something you always were into, or is this something you discovered while in school?
Yeah, I've always been interested in ancient history ever since I was in middle school. Reading just boring textbooks, boring history books was a way for me to kind of escape my school experience, which was kind of rough at times. So I've always kind of had a passion for it. I think what got me interested in it as an adult was my religious beliefs. So I'm part
Hmm.
of a Latter-day Saint tradition, and we believe in a text called the Book of Mormon, which claims that there was an advanced civilization here pre-Columbus in North America or South America. There's some debate about that, and so I really got interested in seeing if that claim was true, and that led me to finding out and doing research on some of the Native American traditions that we find about Medina. Those weren't their original names. They were called the Mound Builders, and they were persons of gigantic stature. And in my research, I was able to see that there was a connection between their culture and ancient Near Eastern cultures, particularly the Egyptians and the Israelites.
Okay, very interesting. So, did you grow up Mormon, or is this something you chose later in life?
No, this was definitely as an adult. I was raised Baptist, typical Black American Baptist. I was going to be a pastor at one point. I
Oh,
was
wow.
licensed as a pastor for a while. I went to seminary hoping to be a Baptist minister. Kind of had a crisis of faith, not because of the Baptist church or anything, but just my own personal experiences. So I wasn't religious for a long time, maybe like
Mm.
4 or 5 years, and then got back into it with the Latter Day Saint tradition. I've been a spiritual person. I'll say that I've always been a spiritual person, but I wasn't part of a particular denomination for several years. But yes, joining the Latter Day Saint tradition was something that I did as an adult.
Okay, very cool. I myself, I grew up kind of, Methodist Christian, a little bit. I would go to Sunday school a little bit. Then I fell away from
Yeah,
God for 10 years and I did some horrible things, ended up in prison, a addict, addicted to all sorts of things. And then recently I discovered spirituality a few years ago and then I
wonderful.
came into Christ this year and it's been a whole process for me. So I love that uh, I don't love it, but I mean that you also had your own falling away and having to find yourself in this way as an adult, because as a child we're all, it's presented to us and then we really have to
Oh
figure
yeah.
things out. So that's very
Yeah,
interesting.
yeah. We're kind of, my parents really kind of pushed, for better and worse, they really kind of pushed their religion on me. And
Yeah.
like you said, as a kid, it's just something that you basically inherit. And as you get older, you have to find your own path. As with many things.
Yeah, very, very cool. So, with the Mormon history, I would like to start there before we get into the Giants, because I know the Mormons tell a different side of American history, as you said, that's what got you into the Giants. Uh, so I would like to ask you about that. But before we get into that, are you familiar with the Moorish people?
Are you talking about Noble Girali and the Moorish Science Temple? Um,
Well, yes, I guess they. I don't know the specifics about the Moors, but I know they were a group of men and women who were living in the Americas, and that. Go ahead.
yes. There's I know a little bit about them. So I
Okay.
believe that, the teachings of the noble Drew Ali said that there was this kind of dark race of people, the Moors, who once inhabited America. And he
Mhm.
made a connection between kind of Black Americans as their kind of descendants, which was really interesting. I don't know too much about that, but I
Okay.
know that that is one tradition about the Moors in America. And then there's some traditions that, and Frank Joseph has written about this, that connect those Moors with being giants.
Yes, that's what I was going to get into. Is that the Moors were the giants, and they were of darker skin,
Yeah.
and there's maybe that they were the Ottoman Empire in the Americas.
Yes, yes. So there's the Moors of the Ottoman Empire, so they practiced Islam, which was the same religion that Drew Ali practiced. He actually had his own version of the Quran, the Holy Quran of the Moorish Science Temple. And
Mm.
yeah, he claims that, there was a um there was a migration from what were formerly the parts of the Ottoman Empire into the Americas, and that the Native Americans kind of retained this knowledge of the Moors, that they were here, and that basically Black Americans. It's interesting because he says Black Americans don't necessarily come from Africa, but we're part of this Moorish tribe that was always here, kind of in conjunction with the Native Americans. Very, very interesting.
Yes, it is very interesting. And with that comes uh Mormon is sort of, more man or
Hmm.
more man, but the way I'm studying language and breaking words down and seeing how Germanic languages, they seem to all resonate with different roots, just the same way the Latin languages all break down into certain root words. They're much closer than the Germanic,
Yeah,
but
it's all connected. It's very when you
yes.
do. So I mean, I teach Latin to my students, and there's so many connections. I mean, Latin, as the Roman, as kind of the mother language of the Romance languages, but then Latin itself goes back to the Indo-European languages. So it's all very connected.
Yeah, so when I'm breaking words down, every time I see a word, I break it down to each phonetic, more man. So I'm like, oh, is that to cover up? Is that like a name that was given in order to cover up the Moorish people? Is to say it was Mormons that were done, and not to take away from the Moorish people, Mormons or
Yeah.
anything. I'm just saying that
I
the
never
name
thought
it was
about that
interesting.
actually. But it's interesting because in the Book of Mormon, you have a group known as the Lamanites, who are seen as the ancestors of Native Americans. And the Lamanites are specifically described, and there's some debate about this, whether it's metaphorical or literal, but they're described as having dark skin, in fact, a skin of blackness.
Hmm.
So is that the same group of people? It's interesting because in the Latter-day Saint tradition, we connect that with the Native Americans, but is it talking about another group of dark-skinned people? That's very interesting. So
Yeah.
there is a guy. He actually did a commentary on the Book of Mormon, saying that it was actually connected to African peoples. It's called the
Hmm.
African Bible. That's his commentary. I can't remember the author of it. Not necessarily Native American people, but very interesting. Kind of drawing on, who were these dark-skinned people that the Book of Mormon claims existed in ancient times.
Yeah, and the Mormons are said to have been on their quest out west that they would stop and build these fantastic structures. And when we look at old world architecture, I'm not sure if you're familiar with Michelle Gibson. She's doing a lot of different things, and
Yeah.
she's uncovered a lot of stuff about the Moorish people and how they built. And it seems to be that maybe the Mormons were building in a very similar way to the Moorish people, maybe, or it's claimed, one way or the other, that it's very similar.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it's interesting because um, we have all over North America. This is something that I've gotten into in the past couple of years, thanks to my friend Dr. Greg Little. These Native American mounds, or well, we just call them mounds. We don't know who actually built them, but they're mounds all over, especially in the Ohio, West Virginia, Kentucky region, basically like on a grid. Um, and that go back, people believe, to the Hopewell and to the Adena. But it's interesting because in the Book of Mormon, it talks about these different hills: the hill Cumorah,
Mm.
the hill Omni, all these different hills. And hill, in my opinion, that term hill, however Joseph Smith was translating that, is synonymous with these different mounds and these structures that we see all over the United States, especially in the Midwest.
Wow. Wow, very interesting. I've come across a lot of things, and might take it off topic just a little bit, but I've come across a lot of things that show that maybe the mounds were at one time pyramids that somehow were
Yeah,
melted with some kind of very hot, whether it was an asteroid that hit the Earth, or some people speculate directed energy weapons from an ancient civilization, advanced civilization, and maybe that's how Atlantis uh, was destroyed. A lot of in between theories, from those two extremes, but there was something that possibly melted these buildings, and now they look like mountains, they look like hills, they look like mounds, but there's still
yeah,
some remains on it that you can see, or it looks like
yeah,
someone carved out of rock, but maybe it was a building that was just had extreme heat and extreme uh, freezing at the same time, to make it go from mud to rock.
yeah. One of the things, I think you raised a really good point. One of the things I often tell people is that, we go to the mounds nowadays and we just think of them as just clumps of grass. But thousands of years ago, these are places where there were buildings and cities and villages all around them. And they looked just like with the Egyptian pyramids, they looked much different then than they do now. And it's funny that you made the pyramid connection because certain mounds, such as Monk's Mound, the dimensions for those mounds are exactly the same as dimensions for the pyramids of Giza. So
Hmm.
there seems to be a direct
And
connection
where's that
there.
one at?
Monk's Mound, I believe, is in Illinois, I believe.
Okay.
So yeah. So, but the dimensions are very similar.
Wow, very interesting. I had Larry Paul on the other day. He does a lot of research in the Great Pyramids of Giza, and he was telling me a lot of mind blowing stuff. Where this Great Pyramid is maybe prophesied of Jesus Christ in so many different ways. He was breaking it down at that encoded and not just Jesus, but all of humanity's ascent. The way it's a 26-degree angle going up, and
Oh, fascinating.
yeah, there's a
Yeah.
lot of stuff to it. It has the name of God right at the opening of it, but the Egyptian people have, or Egyptian government has sealed off the opening
Yeah,
and
they
give
don't
you a
let
different one.
anybody in there. You can't do anything in those pyramids. So there
Yeah.
seems to, and that's a whole nother rabbit hole of why they don't give anybody access to those pyramids. But it's interesting that you mentioned the Christian connection because there's a strong tradition of monotheism going back kind of pre-Christian uh, to in Egypt. So you have right before the time of Moses in the 12th, 13th century BCE, you have the worship of the sun god as kind of this monotheistic religion that emerges in Egypt. And some people, I believe, Jung or Freud, argued for this, that Moses got his monotheism as being raised in the Egyptian court. Moses got his monotheism from the Egyptians. So, kind of a connection between kind of the Israelite Jewish monotheism, what would become Judeo Christianity, with Egyptian religion.
Yeah, it's very interesting. The way that I woke up 2 years ago was, firstly, it was like ghost, dog man, Bigfoot type stories to get me interested, and then it turned into giants and
Yeah,
ancient civilizations. So the two that I studied, North America, I wanted to know pre-Columbus what was here, and Egypt. They
yeah,
were the two. That's what I want to know. There's some kind of connection. I wanted to figure it out, or at least get my feet wet into it. And uh, what I found is that the Native Americans also shared one quote unquote religion, one spiritual practice.
hmm
I think
hmm
religion was probably given to us at the latest reset. I'm finding out that a lot of mud flood stuff and a lot of covered up history in the 1700s, 1800s, that I think that maybe religion was given to us and presented to us in the way that we know it, but that it was always just it was history instead. It was the truth.
yeah,
Everyone just kind of knew. So I when we look at like monotheism, everyone just kind of knew and they're like, "Oh yeah, that's God," because they were very close with God.
yeah, yeah. And the Native Americans in the Book of Mormon, for example, are presented as monotheist.
Mhm.
Um, and it's interesting you said this is just always history because the original Book of Mormon when it came out, if you get open up a Book of Mormon today, it looks very much like the Bible with verses and chapters and stuff. But when it was first published in 1830, and Joseph Smith intended to be published this way, just as an ancient document of a history of a people. So it was just history. It wasn't necessarily a religious document, even though of course it has religious implications.
Okay. Yeah. So Joseph Smith, I would like to get into the Mormonism a little bit. In that, so Joseph Smith was a Christian, right? And then he
Yeah.
had these visions. Do you want to explain a little bit of that?
Yeah, yeah. So Joseph Smith, according to his own account, his family was kind of leaning towards the Methodist tradition, and he has this vision, very similar to kind of a UFO vision that's described today. But he has this vision of what he claims to be his God the Father and God the Son, and later he's visited by this angel Moroni, who gives him. There's some debate over this. It's either Nephi or Moroni, but this angel gives him these gold plates and says, "This is an ancient record. This is an ancient document, and I will give you the skills to translate this into English to share this ancient document about ancient America to the rest of the world."
Wow. That is mind blowing. That is not how I've ever heard that presented before. That
Yeah.
is very mind blowing. So he encounters this angel, and so what's the type of American history? Are there any like bullet points that you could go over for us briefly? Like any of that type of stuff?
Yeah, so basically, according to the book, there is a group of people known as the Nephites who travel from Jerusalem right before the destruction of the Jerusalem temple in 586 BCE. They travel by boat over to the American continent. Now, whether it's North America, which I believe, or South America, as other Mormons argue for, is debated. But they travel over here, they settle and they become two different groups, the Nephites and the Lamanites. And there's a battle between these two groups, and the Nephites are eventually destroyed and the Lamanites remain. And that seems, in my view, and in the view of people who take the North American position, to be synonymous with these two groups that we see emerging in the archaeological record, the Hopewell and the Adena, and they both kind of die out around the same time that the Nephites are said to have died out around the fourth or fifth century CE. So basically, they're here for about 1,000 years.
Wow. Very interesting. I myself, I find that America probably is involved in some of the biblical information. I'm
Yeah,
I have become psychic in the last few years. It just kind of happened to me. I was kind of just opened up by God, and
yeah,
I've been on this path. And the last few days, well, so in the last few weeks, I've been realizing that maybe America has something to do with Israel, of the biblical Israel. That maybe
yeah,
it could be part of it in some way. And then the other day, I was picking up on, well, if if it was, then who would the people have been? And then like the thought, the Amish just popped in my mind. And then I started researching the Amish, and they're so closely connected to the Jewish people, just a little slight differences, but they come from the Jewish people. So when I start to get information like that, and it does line up. I mean, there's historical evidence to it. It really blows my mind.
Yeah, yeah. So kind of that Pennsylvania Dutch region, if you go back, so kind of going into the old world, kind of the Germanic peoples. So the Danish, for example, that name comes directly from the tribe of Dan.
Hmm.
So those people are descended basically from the tribe of Dan, and they travel over to North America and settle. But the Amish, yeah, their rituals, their traditions are very, very similar to what you get in Judaism and in ancient Israelite religion. Couple of things, very interesting things in Latter Day Saint tradition. There is the notion that the Garden of Eden once existed in North America, in what is now kind of the Missouri, Kansas City, Missouri type of area, Jackson County, Missouri area. So there's a direct biblical connection with America here. So, according to Joseph Smith, the Garden of Eden was not someplace in the Near East, but here. And in my own tradition, I'm a elder in the Church of Jesus Christ of the Elijah Message, the Assured Way. In my own tradition, we believe that when Christ returns, a temple will be built directly in Jackson County, Missouri. So that's part of my own religious tradition.
Wow.
Interestingly enough, there is another group. I'm not sure if you've heard of them, the Hebrew Israelites. They're kind of a very controversial group.
A little
Um,
bit. This is the Black Israelites.
yeah, Black Israelites, yes,
Okay.
and very controversial, sometimes kind of black supremacist. Um, but there's actually some very interesting videos that they have done talking about uh, the Noah story, the flood story, and how if Noah is floating in this boat for 140 days, I don't personally believe it was a boat. I think it was some type of a spaceship or aircraft, but if we say it's a boat, he's floating around for 140 days, he's not going to land in the Near East. That's going to drag him all the way over to America. So kind of arguing that, wherever this mount that the ark landed on, that was in the Americas rather than the Near East. So some very interesting connections there, kind of along the line of what you were saying, linking America to biblical history.
Yeah, I mean, that is some great knowledge right there. I didn't know. Well, I did know about the Noah story because they say he couldn't possibly have been on the water that long and only gone that far. It would have had to been
Yeah,
much further.
exactly.
Yeah,
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 exactly.
yeah. So that's very interesting stuff. And hey, is that near New Madrid, the Missouri, Jackson County, Missouri? Do you know of the New Madrid earthquake in 1812?
I'm not familiar with that.
So
That's
that
curious. That's something I have to look into.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that earthquake, it was several earthquakes, and they were so large that it actually reversed the Mississippi River and created
Okay,
two
it's right on the
waterfalls.
Mississippi. It is on the Mississippi River. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, so yeah, the New Madrid earthquake, that's part of. So I think the second destruction of the world, according to the Bible, by fire has occurred in the 1800s, and the New Madrid earthquake is part of that, right? Exactly, on the Mississippi River.
On the
So this
Mississippi River. Yeah.
So if that was Eden, as the Mormons are claiming, possibly, then I mean, it would make sense that that earthquake would be right there and
What
would
happened there?
reverse the
Yeah,
river. Wow,
yeah, yeah.
wow, this is just this the way that life works. God, He just reveals things to me, and when I first say it, it's like this crazy out there idea, and then I just find evidence all over the place from unconnected sources, bringing unconnected materials, and it's just it's a great it's a trip. It's a treasure. It's a trip. This life that God leads for us. Uh, Okay,
Indeed.
so getting into the Giants now. So Joseph Smith, he he was saying that there were giants over in the Americas. Was he saying that they were a certain race, or were they many races? Do you know about that at all?
Well, I know, I don't know if he specifically identifies. I think he says that there are, so in one of the books that are in the Latter-day Saint tradition, Teachings of Joseph Smith, I think he does mention some mummified giants. He doesn't specifically mention them he doesn't specifically make a connection between the people in the Book of Mormon and the giants, even though he does connect them in some ways with the mound builders. So they would have been by default giants because the mound builders themselves are giants.
Hmm.
But he says that they were Israelite, and so from the Near East, and that they intermingled with the native inhabitants here, so with the Native Americans. And so he's not the only one to have made this claim. People often say, this is just something that Joseph Smith thought up in his head. But several people, including Christopher Columbus, he thought that Israelites had come from the Near East to the American continent. That was one of his reasons for wanting to go westward to find the lost tribe of Israel. So this is an idea that was way before Joseph Smith's time. So he viewed them as Israelite. And again, there's kind of showing kind of the unity of everything around us. Those Israelites could have on their migration on their migration through Europe into across the Atlantic to North America, could have mingled with kind of the Caucasian population. So there's a lot of stuff in the Celtic traditions and the Germanic traditions, a lot of cultural features that are very similar to Israelite tradition. In fact, you have Israelite giants I was on a podcast talking about this earlier. You have Israelite giants who are mentioned in the traditions of the Irish, for example, in the traditions of the Germans, for example. And I think that, those races come over across the Atlantic with their Israelite traditions, with their Jewish traditions, and intermingle with the native inhabitants of the land. So this is why you get in some Native American traditions that these giants were Caucasian or Celtic-like. So I think that, you have these kind of Semitic giants intermingling with these Europeans, and then they all come over to North America.
Very interesting. I think the tribes of Israel were probably all the races. I don't think that it was limited. I think
Yeah.
if they were God's people, that they would just be all of us. I mean, that makes sense to me. And
Indeed.
I think they probably crossed through the Atlantic, probably went down into Africa, probably crossed the Pacific, probably
Yeah.
went in Europe to the Netherlands, across to Canada, and that way as well. And we have the
That's
Scythians.
a yeah, yeah. That's a really good point because I mean, you have Israelites everywhere. You have Israelites, you have Jews in India, you have the Ethiopian Jews in Africa. So yeah, they went all over the place.
Yeah, so this is some incredible stuff. So, your book, Egypt to Ohio, I want to talk about that a little bit.
Yeah.
And we're talking about the lost tribes of Israel. I know Ohio has a bunch of names of cities, and I don't know if it's streets, but there's a lot of names that have to do with like tribes of Israel
Hmm.
and Native Americans, and like this has been a question for a long time in the mainstream because of Ohio's link to Egypt. There seems to be some kind of copy going on there. So what is happening in Ohio? Do you know any of the names offhand that represent the tribes of Israel, the mounds that represent Egypt and the tribes of Israel?
Yeah, yeah, that's a really good point. Ohio is kind of the center for all of this. In Ohio, for both the Hopewell and Adena, that was their central place of operation. Now, some of the biblical names that you get for towns and places, Shiloh, Jerusalem, Jordan, those come from European settlers who, Christianity was their religion. But some of those traditions are from the Native Americans themselves. They retain this memory of kind of this biblical group of giants that lived in Ohio. And we find in a lot of these mounds, especially the Newark earthworks and others, we find not only giant remains, giant skeletal remains, but these tablets and inscriptions that are Semitic in their features. So they contain biblical quotes and biblical imagery, and definitely point to a group of individuals, a civilization that was heavily influenced by the traditions that we get in the Old Testament.
Hmm. Okay, so these. So someone may ask, where are the bones? Is it all the Smithsonian, or what happened to all this?
Yeah, I get that. I actually get that question a lot. So, the Smithsonian has part of it. There was a whole cover up, a deliberate cover up to kind of uh, reinforce the idea that there was no real civilizations here before the Europeans settled, before Columbus came over here. Also, a lot of this stuff was just destroyed, both intentionally, going back to Smithsonian, or unintentionally with the development of the land. Another thing that you have to remember is that a lot of these bones were in bog-like areas. So these mounds were basically built over this bog-like area. And when you take bones out of a bog that have been there for thousands of years, they deteriorate very quickly and very easily. So that happened with a lot of the bones. But we have pictures of these bones. We have newspapers and journals that recorded these findings. So even though in many cases we don't have the bones themselves, we have a lot of evidence, tons of evidence, and any other type of topic. This would be kind of a smoking gun for these giants having existed in the Midwest.
Yeah, I have come across the number that there's over 10,000 newspaper headlines
Yes,
from the 1800s and 1900s about
yes,
giants.
yes.
10,000. That, even if 9,500 of them are hoaxes, that would still be
Yeah, you still have a
500.
ton. Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
that
Yeah.
is so much going on with
No, it's
this.
incredible. Yeah.
Yeah, and the Smithsonian, anyone who's coming to my show is probably already open-minded into the conspiracy theory that, oh yeah, it's being covered up. But the Smithsonian was doing this, like you said, to get rid of any notion that there was a civilization in America that actually had cities, and they tell us that it was just savage Native Americans
Yeah.
that were running around in skirts and
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
just the most ridiculous things.
Yeah. A definite, just a racial caricature
Yes.
of the Native Americans, and not having anything to do with the reality on the ground or even the Native American traditions themselves.
Yes. And I think there were probably many Native Americans who weren't living in these cities. As we are talking earlier, there's the Moorish people, there's the tribes of Israel. There's probably many things going on here, many
Yeah.
metropolises, but there were still people who were like, "Nah, I'm just going to do my thing on the land, and I'm going to move about with the seasons as the seasons change."
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
think today they want us boxed in, and they don't want us thinking that's an option. And really, they accept it down south with the migrant workers, but they keep it for people who don't speak English for the most part.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it's very strange how they treat everything, because the Mexicans are the product of Spanish and Native Americans,
Hmm.
but
Hmm.
they're not treated the same way as Native Americans, but they
No.
are Native Americans. It's very, very
Yeah.
strange.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a very interesting dynamic, but you're right. Latino, they are basically Native American, like half Native American. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
and
So,
a lot of Native American tribes speak Spanish.
yeah. Yeah, and I was just saying this to my girlfriend the other day. I was like, the Latin language and the Spanish language, we forget that the Spaniards were white, and they came from Europe and mixed with the bronze skin colored people. And now when
Yeah,
we think Latin or Latino, we have an image in our mind, but actually Latin goes back to something else, entirely. But
Yeah.
it's just like the way there's a narrative that is shaped in our culture to make us think one certain way so that we don't go outside of that box. And
Yeah. Yeah.
uh, it's,
And that's that comes down to basically the history we've been taught, just to think within the box and never ever to go outside of it. And that's the type of history we've had, just a very, in my view, limited and distorted view of history for the past 150 years.
yeah. Okay, so getting back to the Egypt connection, are you familiar with the pyramid and the Egyptian types of artifacts that were found in the Grand Canyon?
Yes, yes. So, yeah, there has actually been quite a bit of stuff. One of my favorites, I believe there was a cat sarcophagi that was found in the Grand Canyon. The Grand Canyon is just an amazing place. Again, just as with the pyramids, ironically, that it's ironic that you mentioned this. Just as with the pyramids in Egypt, the Grand Canyon is a place the U.S. government won't allow you access to, and there's so much rich tradition there. There have been cities that they found. I haven't heard of pyramids, but I have heard of Egyptian artifacts they've excavated, cartouches. Figurines of specific pharaohs. You can date them to a particular time. I believe one pharaoh was Ramsey the second, so you could date him around the same time as the biblical Moses. Um, and I know there was a cat cartouche. There was a cat that was buried, and I think there was an image of Bastet, the cat Egyptian god that they also found. So they found a ton of this stuff in the Grand Canyon. It just kind of confirms that you have, and as I talk about in my book, this Israelite Egyptian fusion culture that came over to the North American continent and settled here. We find this kind of Egyptian Israelite uh, traces of this culture all throughout the Midwest and even into the Southwest, in the Grand Canyon.
Well, and if Israel was in America, then Egypt would be in America as well. And the Grand
Hmm.
Canyon is very close to uh, uh, Missouri. It's kind of close to Missouri, but it's much closer to California, which has Joshua trees. And it's interesting, only Joshua trees grow in Israel and California. And California
Yeah.
used to be an island where, and there, the sea that disconnected Utah, or that was over top of Utah, Arizona, and Nevada, was actually called the Red Sea. We have maps from the 1500s that have California depicted with the Red Sea right there. So again, very interesting stuff how this is all aligning.
Connected. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So with Egypt, have you been to Egypt yourself?
I have not been. I have been to Jordan, but I've never been to Egypt.
Okay. Well, how was Jordan?
It was pretty cool. It was actually not mainland Jordan. It was part of the Jordanian embassy. So I got to meet some people there. But they showed us a manuscript, a very old manuscript that they had of the Bible. So Jordan actually has a lot of biblical history to it. It has some of the oldest biblical artifacts, oldest Bible manuscripts that there are. But yeah, I've never been to Egypt. I'm hoping to one day.
Okay. So how do you find the connection from Egypt to Ohio? What stuck out to you that made you think that these giants here in America are connected possibly to Egypt?
Yeah, I think there were a couple of things. First off, again, Monk's Mound, kind of the dimensions of the mounds, the Native American mounds being similar to the dimensions, basically not just similar, basically the same as the pyramids of Giza, and also these cultural features that you have the giants buried in a very similar way that you have with the Egyptian pharaohs. So The pharaohs were buried with their servants, with their jewelry, with text and tablets that were important to them. Same thing that we find with these giants. These giants are buried with these tablets. They're buried. We have a female giant who was buried with her jewelry. They seem to have been buried with other servants. So some direct parallels there. The mounds, just as with the pyramids, kind of being the center, of the cultural community. Um, so all of these things suggesting a direct connection between Egypt and the civilizations that flourished in Ohio, the Hopewell and Adena civilizations that flourished in Ohio.
Okay, and the elongated skulls, is that something that you've been studying?
Yes, yes. So a lot of these giants, and not all giants, I always like to point this out, not all giants are the same. Um, they There's some giants who look just like us, they're just taller. And then you have these giants with these elongated skulls, which is very similar to how some of the pharaohs in Egypt, another connection here, are depicted. So Amenhotep, I believe, is Akhenaten, I believe, is depicted with a larger than usual head, and I believe his mummy shows that his skull was kind of elongated. So I'm thinking that these are the same types of giants that we have in Egypt who come over to North America.
Okay, so I didn't even hear about elongated skulls being in the Americas.
Yes, yes, some of the giants they found had elongated skulls. Now, you get that more for giants in South America, such as in
Okay,
Peru, but you do have giants with elongated skulls
the
in North
Easter
America.
Island.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So when you're saying this, that they have different skulls, for I think the Israelites are giant humans, humanoid, look like us, have just larger dimensions, and that these elongated skulls, the giants with elongated skulls, they were something else. I think that they were probably the fallen angels, or maybe Nephilim. I don't, or maybe an offspring. I think that they're definitely an offspring to the seraphim, angels that fell and took physical bodies. What's your opinion on who the beings with the elongated skulls would be?
Yeah, I think that so you have in Genesis 6, you have the reference to the Nephilim, and sometimes people, especially in the history of interpretation, people have taken that as the fall of fallen angels. So in the Septuagint, the Greek Bible, that's translated as angelos, so angels, same as in the Latin Vulgate. But I've always taken that term. The term Nephilim just comes from the term Nephal, meaning just fallen. So I've always taken that as referring to a long lost fallen civilization, not necessarily supernatural, but going way back, so far back that it's not even identified by the biblical authors in Genesis chapter 6. So I've always taken that as perhaps referring to a very ancient civilization, possibly Atlantis. And we know that the Atlanteans used a psychic ability similar to what these giants with the elongated skulls uh, did. So that's the connection that I see there.
So you think that maybe they were pre-Adamite
Yeah,
race? Wow.
yeah.
So they were remains or survivors of Atlantis?
Possibly, and I think that Frank Joseph talks about this as well. I think that the parallels that you see between the American mounds and the Egyptian pyramids point back to kind of an Atlantean knowledge because Atlantis had pyramids as well. So this Atlantean knowledge that was retained throughout the world. This is why you have pyramids in South America as well.
Even
That was
Antarctica.
retained. Yep, exactly, throughout the world. Um, and it's retained by these giants, and these giants with these heads really had this psychic ability and these elongated skulls to create these type of buildings and structures.
Wow, very interesting. I myself, I have an elongated head for a human, and I now have psychic abilities. So,
Yeah.
very funny how you just mentioned that. I used to be made fun of as a kid growing up because I had a long, skinny head.
Oh
Me and my
gosh.
brothers.
Yeah, people would make fun of me. They said my head was too short, so I looked like a yeah, looked like a cube. So yes.
Uh, I don't think your head looks like a cube. I think you have a nice head.
Thank you.
um, So, that's very interesting that, that you believe they're pre-Adamite. I myself also believe that. I just haven't put that together with the Atlantis thing. I've kinda been trying to stay away from Atlantis. Everything that I'm finding, it kinda leads me in that direction. The I
Yeah.
don't know if you're familiar with Tartaria when so that's like a more recent thing, and they're trying to
Yes.
tie
Yes.
that in with Atlantis, and
Yeah.
it's there's a lot of different stuff that pulls you in that direction, and I myself think that it probably was pre-Adamite. I don't think Adam and Eve were made until I think God just made them from the dust of the earth, as they say, and I think Genesis is describing two different creation stories in Genesis 1 and Genesis 2. I think the
Yeah. Well, in and I talk about this when I teach Old Testament. Mainstream biblical scholarship argues for this as well. So in Genesis 1, you have what's known as the priestly account of creation. And then in Genesis 2 and 3, you have what's known as the Yahwist version. These are two different authors of the Old Testament. The Yahwist version of creation, where you specifically have Adam and Eve mentioned.
Okay, yeah. So when it's mentioned in Genesis 1, it says, "Let's make a man in our
Yeah, it's
image."
just just a general humanity. And then after that, you get
Yes.
Adam and Eve.
Right. So
Yeah.
it says Adam, but lowercase, right? Instead of Adam, uppercase as a name, it's Adam, just saying man. Correct.
Yeah, I think in Hebrew, I think it might just be Ish and Isha, so male and female. And then you have specifically in Genesis chapter 2, Adam as a name. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, I knew that there was a slight difference there. I just wasn't sure what it was.
Yeah, yeah, and it's difficult because Bible translations make it all sound the same in English, but there is this distinct difference between the Ish and Isha, or Sakar and Unkava, I believe, in Genesis chapter 1, male and female, versus Adam and Chava or Eve in Genesis chapter 2.
Okay. Very interesting. So do you think that Cain is from the serpent seed? Do you think the line of Seth and the line of Cain are the two different seeds, possibly?
Well, it's interesting because um, in in both kind of Latter-day Saint tradition as well as the general history of religions, there was a group called the Canaanites. They were a Gnostic sect in early Christianity, and they worshipped both Cain and the serpent. In fact, there was another group called don't want to confuse people too much, the Ophites, from the Greek word meaning snake, and they worshipped Cain as well. So there was a
Wow.
connection very early on in early Christianity, kind of a heretical sect between Cain and the serpent. And in Latter day Saint scripture, there's a book called the Book of Moses. And in Moses chapter 4 or 5, Cain and the serpent are like BFFs. So there's a connection, there's a very strong connection made there between the two of them, and contrasting that with the line of Seth. So very
Hmm.
interesting.
So the Cainites and the Canaanites are two different groups, correct?
Yes, yes. So the
Okay.
Canaanites were a Gnostic sect. Um, they uh, they rejected the God of the Old Testament and worshipped the serpent and Cain instead. They thought that the serpent and Cain were the ones to bring true knowledge to humanity. So
Then
kind of a perversion there. Yeah.
that's what my next question was going to be. Do you think Cain may be Lucifer, the bringer of light, the bringer of knowledge?
Well, there's certainly in early Christian tradition, you have this notion, and you get it in Rabbinic Judaism as well. Very interesting in the Hebrew. There's a phrase in Genesis chapter 4, verse 1 or verse 2. Eve says, I have created a man with the help of the Lord. The man she's referring to is Cain. Now, that term that's translated as Lord there are other manuscripts that have Elohim instead of the term Yod He Vav He. I won't pronounce it because for my Jewish brethren. But the traditional term that's translated as Lord, YHWH, that's not there in some manuscripts. It just has Elohim. Now, when the Old Testament authors want to talk about Elohim as referring to the Old Testament God, they put the definite article before it. So, Ha Elohim, the God. But by itself, as we have in Genesis chapter 4, it can just mean gods, a God, or a divine being. So, Jewish exegetes, Jewish readers of the Bible, took this as referring to not the Old Testament God, but to another spiritual being, namely Satan. And Christian interpreters, Tertullian, Augustine, and others pick up on this. The authors of the epistles of John, they pick up on this, and they say that Cain is descended from the evil one, from the devil. So that tradition does exist in both Judaism and Christianity.
Yeah, Jesus says it himself. He says, ye old vipers, ye line of snakes,
Yep,
those who
yep.
killed the righteous Abel. When I first heard that, my mind was blown because I was thinking that maybe Cain is Prometheus or Lucifer, because if there was this pre-Adamite race that was created as a slave race to the quote unquote gods, these remaining Atlanteans that created man from monkey, in some regard, primate,
Yeah.
that Cain being created from God, well, coming from Eve, who was created from God, but was partially serpent because Eve, I think the forbidden fruit was having sex with one of these seraphim, one of these Atlanteans, maybe, and her offspring of Cain produced uh, the serpent line, so that when he had all this knowledge from Adam, he had all the knowledge of everything. So he brought this knowledge, and it's a Prometheus or Lucifer type of deal.
Well, it's interesting because in his line, it kind of tied into because I do a lot of Prometheus in my Latin class, because it's Greek
Okay.
mythology and Roman mythology. So Prometheus brings civilization to humanity. Cain is described in the exact same way in the Old Testament. So his descendant Tubal Cain brings music. Another one of his descendants brings agriculture, and Cain himself builds a city, and basically he begins the
Called
urbanization
it Enoch.
of the entire world. Yep, the name's after his son Enoch. So there's a very similar parallel between what Prometheus does and what Cain does for humanity.
Wow, this is very interesting stuff, because this is not something that you have a great wealth of knowledge on. This is something that I didn't have all that much info on, but I just had a feeling that it was something along this line. And now you're filling in so many dots for me right now. It's really mind blowing stuff. That Cain, so Cain, what always threw me off, I don't want to say always, I didn't study the Bible and all, but when he's kicked out, he's afraid that he's going to be killed by the others. And then he comes up with a wife and children. And it's like, Christians, a lot of times they just want to say, oh, that's Adam and Eve's offspring. They had daughters that must have rebelled. But the Bible doesn't tell us anything like that. They're just making it up.
Yeah, yeah. Well, there's a couple of things that are going on. So we have possibly from a biblical scholarship perspective, a conglomeration of traditions here, so that um, there's one tradition where it's just Adam and Eve, Cain, Abel that exists, another where there's more people. I'm of the line that whoever Cain's wife is, these are the human beings from Genesis chapter 1 who are still on the earth before Adam and Eve were created. So he finds a wife from one of those pre-Adamic peoples and marries them, um, and starts a civilization with them. And I think the biblical text supports that. Genesis 1, you have a different type of human being than you have with Adam and Eve in Genesis chapters 2 and 3.
So this brings a whole nother thought to me, that are the sons of God, are they the sons of Cain who then go into the daughters of man? And man being the creation of the fallen rather than the creation of God. Where, I mean, that's a very large question, but it just brings that question to mind.
Yeah, yeah. I've never thought about that. That's very interesting. I always took the sons of God just to be a reference to these giants. And it's interesting that in Genesis 6, it says that the giants took the women, whoever they chose. And that term to take, lachak, when it's used in a sexual context, that means forced action. So these giants are basically forcing these women to have sex with them and to have children by them. And for me, that fits in with some of the personality of the Giants as kind of violent and cruel and oppressive, and that is why God was angry with the situation, and that's why the Giants were destroyed or supposedly destroyed. Because even though the flood came, these giants reappear later on in the Old Testament.
Okay, do you want to touch on that? How do they reappear? I heard somebody say that if you think that the Nephilim survived the flood, then you think God failed. And
No,
so before I have you answer, I just want to retort to that. It's very weird to think that, to take that hard of a stance, because to say that, well, that would mean that once Eve sinned, that God failed. So to say, God does everything on purpose. He wants to shape us, and he has things happen for a reason. So I think it's very reasonable that God didn't kill them all off on purpose, or it happened the way it did because it was supposed to happen this way. So what's your take on that?
Yeah, my take, I mean, you have the flood tradition from all over the world. So you have the biblical flood account, but you also have the Epic of Gilgamesh. You have the flood in Indian literature, in Hindu legend, and you have the flood in China. And I think you even have some African stories about the
It's about
flood.
30 some.
So yes, yes. So my view is always that, the flood didn't necessarily, it was worldwide, but it didn't kill off everybody. Um, Clearly, if it had killed off everybody, then there wouldn't be all these traditions about it all over the world. So I think that some people survived, and I think some of the giants survived, and I think also in conjunction with that, some of the this giant lineage might have survived through Noah. In the book of Enoch and in the book of the giants, Noah is said to be the offspring of the watchers of the giants themselves. So I think all of those things could explain why these giants reappear later on in the biblical tradition
Oh wow! So I was not familiar with that. That Noah was attributed to fathering the
in
Watchers.
certain traditions. Yeah.
Wow, very interesting. Very interesting. Uh, so I just had a little bit more here. This has been. I mean, we have come across a lot of different things, and you're just bringing the knowledge on all of it. This is one of my most favorite conversations so far.
Awesome.
So okay, now we hit the pre-Adamite race, we hit Cain. So now, how does your understanding, so going back to all the information that we just uncovered, how going back to Mormonism, how does that all help you understand the world in this new religious view? Is it because they are presenting a more accurate depiction of the past, and that makes you more drawn to this?
Yeah, well, it's funny because when I became a Latter-day Saint, when I joined the Latter-day Saint tradition, I didn't know about any of this stuff. I just read the Book of Mormon. I really liked it. I had kind of a mystical experience with it, and
Okay.
that led me to see if there was any validity to its claims about an ancient, advanced civilization here in North America. And In my own research, I found out that there was a lot of truth to this claim. And for me, all of this information um, is very humbling. I always say that history is very humbling because we, as present day human beings, we think, with our high tech stuff, with our iPhones and our laptops, we think that we are the pinnacle of civilization, but other civilizations were just as advanced, in my view, even more advanced than we are. But they fell through their pride, they fell through their arrogance and their cruelty. And so I think history is always there. What this has all taught me is that history is always there to teach us a lesson that things go in circles. There's kind of a cycle to things, and if we don't learn from the mistakes of the past, we'll repeat them again.
Wow. Okay, I think I'll have to read the Book of Mormon. I have just started reading the Bible myself. I've watched the Bible Project where they break it down in different ways,
Yes,
but
yes, great
I've
stuff.
yeah, I've recently picked it up myself, and what I'm starting to understand is, so myself, I was born Todd Armstrong, son of man, Todd Armstrong, and I lived life a certain way, and as I said, I changed, and now I have been named in the book of life as Emmanuel Kingman. And there's this like transformation of this drug addict prisoner, way overweight, mental issues, so many different things wrong with me, to now I'm a man of Christ in a
Yeah,
big way. And I'm reading the book
praise
of
be.
John. Yeah, it's all praise to God. It's so amazing the transformation that has happened. But so when I'm reading the book of John, I'm like, oh, John is describing himself transforming into
Hmm.
Christ,
Hmm.
and
Yes,
it really is hitting home for me that way. That I think many humans at the same time were having Christ come through them in such a strong way, and that's
yeah,
what the Bible is maybe talking about. That Mark is documenting Saul becoming Paul.
yeah,
That Luke is documenting Simon becoming Peter, and they're
yeah.
all calling it Christ because those people are saying, "No, this is Christ doing this to me."
Yeah, yeah, and I think I think you kind of hit the nail on the head. These are stories about people becoming something in Christ, but you also read it and you see your own story in it and your own transformation as well, and that's what makes the Bible, in my view, the Book of Mormon as well, but the Bible especially, continually relevant throughout the ages because you see your own story in it. You see what happened to those people, and you see what's happening to yourself.
Yes, that's beautiful. And the last question I have for you is, uh, so where does Jesus come into Mormonism? I know that he is very plays different roles in different religions, and like I said, to
Hmm.
me, I think Jesus is the Holy Spirit, and he comes through us. The Word becomes flesh when I listen to my conscience. When my conscience tells me don't do that, and I don't do that over and over, then okay, the Word is now becoming flesh.
Yeah.
So where
Well, the
does yeah, go ahead.
The Book of Mormon is called, the subtitle for it is Another Testament of Jesus Christ. So I think every tradition that believes in the Book of Mormon, whether you're Utah, LDS, which I'm not, I'm part of a smaller denomination, or Community of Christ, or any of these other groups that believe in the Book of Mormon, we believe that Jesus speaks through the Book of Mormon, that it's his word, just as with the New Testament. But I think, for mainstream Christianity, there's oftentimes a lot of confusion about what Mormons believe with Jesus, but it's basically very similar. So we believe Jesus, of course, is the Son of God and the way through which we are saved. So um, basically, very basically, your standard Christian view of Jesus. But in the Book of Mormon, in particular, we believe that Jesus visited this ancient civilization here in North America. There's actually a whole section of the Book of Mormon, Third Nephi, that talks about that. And the Book of Mormon itself, in general, is basically the words of Jesus Christ to humanity, not just the people in ancient times, but it speaks to us as well today.
Okay, so this would be like a modern day Christianity that, because I say this a lot, that the Christians believe we're like 2,000 years later from Jesus, and that there's been no biblical type of things. There's been no
Yeah.
prophets or anything. So if Mormonism would fill that gap somewhat, at
Yes.
least.
Yes, and all of the Latter-day Saint traditions, we believe that Christ and Christ's prophets, especially for my church, the Church of Jesus Christ with Elijah Message, that John the Baptist, speaks today, and that we continue to receive Scripture and revelation from both Christ and the prophets.
Wow. Amazing stuff, my friend. Really amazing stuff. I'm going to have to uh, delve into Mormonism a little bit more now, the way that you're presenting it. I know I hear of at least people that leave the church, that they're brought up in it and that they leave. It's the same way you were brought up in Christianity and left that. And they have some not nice things to say about it. But that happens with every religion everywhere, as we were
Indeed.
talking earlier.
Yeah.
So I haven't heard it from someone who has, as an adult, become a Mormon before. So this is really eye-opening. I think my audience will really appreciate it. I think that it's a beautiful story what you brought here today. I mean, this is just some great knowledge and a lot of things that I talk about in my own outlandish ways. And you're a professor. You're teaching at university. You're teaching at a high school, and you're bringing your knowledge that fills in these gaps that I'm like, well, I don't know how it could be, but I just have a feeling that this may be true. And you came and you knocked it out of the park, my friend.
Thank you. Thank you. Well,
Yeah,
I
thank you
love
so
talking
much.
about this stuff. I could talk about it for another couple hours.
All right. Well, we'll have to have you on again at some point and break down some more here. Is there anything else that you wanted to get into that we didn't get into? I mean, I'm free to keep going if you like.
I'm thinking, I think we touched on most of the stuff that I want to talk about. We went a couple other avenues as well, which is always great. So I like, whenever I'm on any podcast to do, things a little bit differently for each podcast. So this was a great conversation.
Yeah, I agree. Do you want to let the audience know where they can find you?
Yes, so I have a Facebook page. I also have a business page on Facebook for uh, my tutoring service called Lingua Latina. So I tutor in Latin, Hebrew, and Greek. And I post a lot of stuff on ancient history on that Lingua Latina site. I also have an Instagram account, Adam the Giant Guy, or Adam the Giant Guy 2019, where I post a lot of information about giants and ancient civilization in general. I frequently contribute to Ancient American Magazine, so you can find my writings there. And I have, of course, my book From Egypt to Ohio, and I'm working on a couple of other books now, which I'm hoping to publish next year or the year after.
Wow, that's incredible. I'll have to check out that. What was it? lingualatino.com?
Lingua Latina. Yep.
Okay, lingua latina. Yeah, because I myself I learned Spanish for 2.5 years. I learned it for 2 years for no reason other than I was like, God's telling me to, and then I get a job working. Now I deliver Hispanic food to Hispanic restaurants. So I
Oh,
use my
wonderful.
Spanish, and now I'm learning Greek. And soon as I started learning
Awesome.
Greek, I was drawn towards the Bible. So uh,
Awesome. Actually, I messed up on the title. Gosh, it's late at night.
no
Lingua
worries.
Classica. Sorry, Lingua Classica.
Okay. Yeah, we'll
Lingua
have all.
Latina is it's a simple mistake. Lingua Latina is the textbook that I use for my
Okay.
students. Lingua Classica is my business. So
Okay.
yeah.
Yeah, we will link all of those things in the description. Since you are do Greek, have you ever heard the idea that so we have some people say Yahweh and Jehovah, JHVH in Greek. To me, the way that I would pronounce it, the way I learned Greek is you would pronounce it somewhat like genie or more like genie rather than Yahweh. Have you ever thought of that?
Yeah, it's interesting. In Greek, the term that's usually translated for the divine name in Hebrew is kurios. Jesus is called Kyrios in the Septuagint. The term
Wow.
Kyrios or Lord is used for Yahweh, YHWH. And then in the New Testament, Jesus is called Kyrios. So direct connection, basically saying that Jesus is the God of the Old Testament. But you have these other traditions that put the divine name in Greek in different ways. So some traditions will use the term pi. Um, pi like 3.14 as the term for the divine name. And then others will try and spell out the name, and when they do, they'll use a gamma, so you get that Jehovah, that G sound that you were saying.
Mhm.
So very interesting.
Yeah, so
Whole
what the
history there.
V I know the V makes the N sound in Greek, so when I read that, I'm like, "Oh,
Yes.
that could be genie or
Hmm.
Genie, something like that."
Yep. Yep.
Yeah, so
Yeah. The new looks like a V, but it's actually an N.
yeah, yeah, it's very interesting, and I think I've come to the conclusion, I don't know how on base it is, but that God's name may be A-E-I-O-U, because when we look at the word vow, you break that down, it's vow, L means a solemn promise from God, right? Vow, L, and
Yeah.
what else would God's name be but full of promises? And it was so divine that the Hebrews couldn't write it down, so they only wrote in consonants. You know,
Yeah.
makes sense to me that it would be, and it
Yeah.
would be
Yeah.
pronounced something like Yahuwah, something like that. And then you find Native Americans and Chinese also, they had lords or leaders called Yahuwah. So
So that the term, that theophoric element Yah, is a divine name in Native American tradition as well. And certain tribes will say, that comes directly from our Hebrew lineage, our Hebrew heritage, as the first part of the divine name. Yeah.
wow, super interesting, my friend. So there you have it, folks. Go find Adam Stokes and take his class and follow him on Facebook and Instagram. I mean, he has a great wealth of information, and he is teaching this stuff in school. So it's not like he is just some crazy guy with a podcast like me. He's actually very studied in all of this. So thank you so much, Adam. And we're going to say goodbye to our audience. We will talk to you guys later. Bye.